Hey, everyone.
Hey, Rob.
Hi, everyone.
How's it going?
Great.
Good evening.
A very tense US election.
Yep. Hopefully everyone's staying sane.
Yes.
I'm just trying not to read the news.
No, me too. It's like, you can't even, yeah, but there are some people already rioting, I read.
Yep.
Always surprised by how many people I know outside of the US who are also like following it really closely and like really worried over it.
Yeah. Yeah, in the end, the issue is it will affect us all, even in Europe.
Well, that's one thing that the US doesn't have a trade deficit on, political entertainment.
Yes.
Oh, man. Too true.
Anyone do anything fun for Halloween?
It's strange this year. This year was strange.
Strange.
Yeah, because the kids were allowed to, here in Zurich, the kids were allowed to go out to trick and treat, but just in very small groups. And yeah, not that
I
funny.
realized that I really want trick-or-treaters, but where I live, I do not get them. And Amy and I were just calculating the customer acquisition cost that we were willing to pay for trick-or-treaters.
Yeah, our town did it really well. They normally get like thousands of kids who come in from the surrounding areas, and it's a big deal. This year they closed it down and just said you have to stay within your neighborhood. So our neighborhood has about 12 kids in it. So it's like they all went around in a pack, and trick or treating was done by 7. It was great.
Yeah, it was similar. It was similar. Yeah, but at least they could go.
At least they could go. Yeah, I mean, costumes were a little bit different. There were ones that could accommodate masks underneath and that sort of thing. But you know,
I mean, with the boys, they always have those. But yeah.
we're in the middle of a move, and I was contemplating if we weren't in the middle of the move, I would have totally been one of those houses that has like a candy launcher or something. Like, there are people who had long tubes. You know, I was trying to think of ways that I could incorporate a water balloon slingshot into this, but you know,
Well, that sounds like fun.
Painting the walls and making the house ready to move in were maybe a little more important, unfortunately.
Understandable.
My son is 2, so he doesn't really understand what's happening around trick-or-treating, but we decided to just go on a walk and see what we would encounter. He very much likes his costume. He's a dinosaur. We found a couple of houses that were lowering candy from second-story windows and like a basket on a rope. So they would like put the candy in the basket and then lower it down. He'd be like, what is happening? Candy's coming out of the sky. He was very confused, but pretty happy about it. But Rob, what you were saying about the like customer acquisition cost, instead of getting like a single piece of candy, these houses, they anticipated that very few people would come by. So they had like made little bags with like 15 pieces of candy in them, just so they could get rid of all the candy that they had bought. So I think we saw like 3 houses that gave out candy and filled like half a bucket. I was like, this is not normal expectations, but you usually have to work much harder in order to get this much candy.
I was totally serious. The number we arrived at was $5 per kid. We would, I mean, and that's like what? Like 10 full-size Twix bars if you get them in bulk, right?
Serious haul.
We only
Yeah.
buy Reese's, so I plan for a substantial amount of shrinkage. You know, stock that just mysteriously disappears from the stock room. So
Yep.
our customer
What you gotta
acquisition
do.
cost is much higher. Yeah. Unfortunately, the employees in the house are not the most honest when it comes to staying out of the Halloween candy. That being myself.
Household CEO skimming off the top.
Oh, you got it.
All right. Well, it looks like our attendee list is pretty stable, so let's jump into things. All right, as we always do, just a quick reminder that by all attending, we all agree to the spec agreement, participation guidelines, and code of conduct. There's links in the agenda if you ever want to remind yourself of what's in those. But let's jump to attendees. You know, most people here are familiar faces, but there are a handful of new folks, so it's always good to just kind of go down the list and put a name to a face. We will go in the order that's listed in the agenda doc. I sorted it a little earlier, so if you haven't reloaded in the last 15 or 20 minutes, you should do that. And I left myself and Brian at the top, and then it's organization alphabetical order below from there. And if you're not on this list yet, that's okay. Just feel free to send a pull request while we're going through this and introduce yourself at the end. So that's me at the top. I'm Lee, the chair of our board and head of our working group. Next is you, Brian.
Oh, yes, sorry. Brian Warner, I'm with the Linux Foundation, and I help support the GraphQL Foundation and the GraphQL project. If you have any questions or any issues about the actual mechanics of the way things work, then please feel free to reach out to me, and I'm certainly happy to help.
All right, I think I'm next. So James Baxley, Director of Engineering at Apollo. Been a while since I've been to one of these, but long time attendee. Excited to be back at these again.
Yeah, I'm Michael Stipe. I'm working with Chili Cream. We are basically the creators of the hot chocolate library for .NET. And yeah.
Dan Schafer, one of the creators of GraphQL, still at Facebook, and very bad at understanding daylight savings time. So I'm not an hour late. I'm here exactly when I'm supposed to be.
We're all an hour late for the next couple of months. Do you have Matt here?
I see him, Matt, but I see him
Maybe
as muted.
Maybe
He's Matt Mahoney.
himself.
He works out of the New York office at Facebook on GraphQL clients.
Rob from First Dibs, working on the deferred stream proposal.
Benji said he might have to join a little bit late, so he can introduce himself when he shows up.
Hi, Alan here. I'm representing IBM. I maintain the open API to GraphQL library. Long time no see. Hello, everyone.
I don't see Yogesh on the call.
Oh, okay. Hi, so I'm Evan. I lead APIs at Shopify. Nice to see everybody again.
Hello, I'm Sasha. I work at Twitter. I've been in and out of this working group, but I'm back for a little bit after a long time of not being here.
Hi, I'm Mark. I work at Yelp. I'm here to discuss the schema coordinates RFC.
Hi, I'm Andy.
Anyone that we missed?
Yeah. Hi, I'm Andy. I work at GraphQL Java and Atlassian.
Just the reason I was a little delayed, me and Schafer were actually just in a meeting. Schafer should be coming in shortly.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. also a Facebooker, works on the GraphQL server.
Just to clarify, Lee, because Benjie is not here, am I taking notes today?
That would be great. We'll talk about that in a sec, just as soon as we get through everybody else's attendees.
Great.
Yes, so my name is Ivan, and I help to maintain GraphQL.js and some other foundation repos.
Hey everyone, I'm Robert from AWS.
Anybody else we miss? I see Kunal. Kunal, you there?
Hey everyone. I'm with American Express. My name is Kunal Mahajan. I'm an architect and we're bringing in GraphQL. So I was really interested in joining the session to see if you can become a part of the group.
Welcome. Your audio is cutting a little bit in and out, by the way, just so you're aware. And please send a pull request to add yourself to the agenda. Okay, and then Mark, back to your point. Let's make sure we have coverage on note taking. Benjie is usually our default note taker only because he volunteers himself every time. So thank you for also volunteering yourself. I expect he'll show up in a little bit to help back you up, but thanks for leading the charge. And if anybody else could jump in and help, especially when Mark and or Benjie are in active discussion, that would be super helpful. Great, thanks, Evan. Okay, well, let's take a quick look over our agenda. It's not super long, and just make sure that everything that we want to discuss is here. So we'll take a quick look over previous meetings, action items. I expect there may be still some outstanding, and just make sure those things are covered. We are going to present our TSC policies and procedures that Brian has been spending a lot of time on over the last month or two. And introduce what the TSC is and how it's different from this working group, and mostly how it's similar. We'll talk about schema coordinates, the defer and stream proposal progress, and that is it. Anything else we'd like to add to the agenda before we jump into things? All right. Let's take a look at those open issues. The most interesting ones to talk about are the ones that are closed from last session. I wish Benjie was here because he's usually the one that helps us keep track of which issues are opened when. I see he opened a bunch of back catalog ones, and there's some new ones here that have been closed. The input field deprecation detail, I think, Evan, that was ended up being a discussion between you and Benjie, right? I see that one got closed out. Is that accurate?
Which one specifically?
I think,
sorry.
This is 517 on the issues list.
17.
I think we ended up, this was a to-do that was in a previous meeting that we closed out in discussion in the last meeting.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Benjie was just doing good note taking for us on that. Okay, there's some other open ones here that I think might be best for us to follow up on offline. There's some about asking for feedback and scheduling a call for a GraphQL Scalers hosting meeting. I think those are still pending for us.
Yeah, there are a few that are on my plate that I haven't gotten to in the last month because shopping season is crazy for us right now.
Well, that's a good thing. All right, well, let's jump to the TSC policies and procedures. Brian, I'm actually going to hand it to you to lead this since you've done most of the authoring of this, and then I'll jump in to add anything or help answer questions as they come up.
Sure, absolutely. So there's a link in the agenda to a document which is now in the GraphQL-WG repo called GraphQL-TSC.md. And to give a little bit of context, what this is, the GraphQL governing documents for the specification project, they include this concept of a technical steering committee. And the technical steering committee has a number of different roles. They include making core decisions for the specification, like when a specification is approved. They also involve just kind of general organizational things about the project, like what is within the scope of the project, what is out of scope of the project, and in the sense that if there's ever a need to have a broad-based decision which involves voting, this is the pool of people who would vote. This is fairly typical for Linux Foundation projects in general. We do have this concept that on the technical side of the project, that the technical governance should be something which is run by the project itself. So that's the reason that this is separate from the governing board, which of course, governing board manages the GraphQL Foundation. What this is, basically we've been operating the TSC as a fairly ad hoc body since the project got started here, or since the specification part of the project got started. And the goal here was to document out some various policies and procedures so that there's a bit more structure and everybody kind of understands what this is and how things should work. In putting this together, I went through a number of other projects that we have here and pulled in some best practices and then adapted some things through a good deal of conversation with Lee and some other folks, just to try and put something together that would make sense. The goal here is for the technical steering committee to be a fairly lightweight body. There are certainly some decisions which are explicitly delegated to it, like again, specification approval or deciding the scope of the project. But the goal is not to have tops down means of governing the project here or tell the project what to do. The goal is very much for the project to continue to work in a bottoms up fashion, where ideas they float up through the contribution process, and then the TSC gets involved where they need to. Getting to this specific document, what we have in here are a couple of main sections. And there are a few things, if you click into it, that you'll see as you skim through it. First off, it just starts with general vital statistics about the technical steering committee and GraphQL itself. Here's a list of the different repos that are involved. Here are the different projects. Here's when we meet and how we meet and where to find the calendar and things like that. It also goes through, effectively, what is the scope of a technical steering committee? Again, one of the core principles here is to try and push decision-making to the lowest level possible. We don't want to get into a situation where there's a single group of folks upon whom decisions are blocked or anything like that. So the current process where there are tasks which are delegated out to working groups and different groups of people self-organize to help make decisions and make recommendations, that is absolutely the process that we want to continue to follow here. With that said, there's also an understanding that there are things which the technical steering committee should do, approving releases, but where there may be bandwidth constrained based upon the frequency of things like, releases of sub-projects or reference implementations or whatever. And so, we want to make sure that there's the ability to explicitly say there are other groups that should be making decisions whether a release is final. Going down a little bit, there are the collaboration tools, where to find the mailing list, where to find Slack, calendars, how to hold meetings. One of the things which is in here, which, it's not necessarily specific to the TSC, but is useful to have documented, would be how to use the GraphQL Zoom. The Zoom that we're on right now, this is a kind of a common one which can be used by the project and the various reference implementations. But we do need to make sure that we manage traffic appropriately so that there aren't multiple meetings scheduled at the same time. There's some information in there about how to request a meeting, and I can certainly help with that as well. Moving down a little bit to TSC members, begins to describe who is on the TSC and how are decisions made. There are a couple of key things I'd like to highlight for you here. One of them is that we have this concept of voting members because we need to. And again, this is things in the charter which explicitly say they require a vote. By and large, though, what we're looking for here is for decisions to be made by consensus as they currently are, and really only using the voting process of this when we really need to. So either it's required or a decision can't be made by consensus. The TSC voting members, again, this is the difference between a TSC voting member and somebody who is participating as a non-voting member in most circumstances is going to be very minimal. The main reason for having voting members is to know when we do need to call a vote, who do we need to ask? Now, as far as the process of becoming a voting member and the term of voting members, we had looked at, really one of the goals here was long-term stability. We're looking at a term for the voting members of 2 years. And the idea here is that every year would host an election, and half of those seats would be up for election to serve a 2-year term. The idea is that if there is an election, if the voting members do change, we don't want to have a substantial brain drain if a bunch of people left the TSC and new members came on. So the goal here is continuity. The second thing is that anybody can nominate themselves for a TSC seat. So when half of the TSC seats are up for election, there'd be a nomination period. Community members can nominate themselves. Existing TSC members can nominate themselves. And then when it comes time to actually decide who's going to be the voting member for these 2-year terms, the TSC members who aren't up for election would be the ones who would do the vote. The idea here is we don't want anybody ever in a situation where they're having to vote on their own seat. So the goal, again, it's continuity with opportunities for new people to cycle in as the opportunity presents itself. There's a bit more information here as well on specific dates and the voting process. The goal here, just in general for votes, is we want to make sure that it's possible for the TSC to operate smoothly. There's some very standard language that we use in our other projects here. For example, if somebody misses a number of meetings, then they're no longer counted as a voting member. So you don't end up with a situation where if somebody goes on an extended vacation or somebody changes jobs or whatever. We don't want to block the ability of the TSC to make decisions. And of course, if you suddenly start reattending, then the voting privileges are reinstated. So again, the goal here, the overarching theme should be, we want to make this as efficient and as lightweight as possible. Along those lines, one of the other changes is meeting cadence. Historically, the TSC has just met on an ad hoc basis when needed. One of the things which Lee and I had discussed and probably makes quite a bit of sense here is that TSC meetings would be held going forward at the beginning of the working group call. The idea would be that we would have an opportunity to address any TSC business that might come up really on fairly frequently without waiting for it to accumulate. And this would be a minimal time investment, but also everybody then would know and be able to plan, here's when the TSC meetings are going to be, to make sure that you have the ability to actually join those. There are a few other things in here, and then I'll open it up for questions. When we get down into the policies and procedures, there's some information in here. The TSC is meant to be a self-governing body. If there are changes to this particular document that the TSC wants to make, something which doesn't work or something which isn't clear or something like that, there's a process to do that, which accommodates time zones. We are a global community. Need to make sure that decisions are open for a sufficient period of time so that people have an opportunity to weigh in. And then there's also some information here as well that explicitly grants the TSC the ability and the responsibility to help maintain order within the GitHub account. For example, making sure that we have reasonable naming conventions on the repos, making sure that we have a process if somebody wants to transfer a repo over into the GraphQL organization, a process for it to be adopted, so that these things aren't happening, just kind of willy-nilly. We want to avoid that, so there's some level of structure and organization here. Getting down to the end, there's some links off to the IP policy and some information on for example, copyright notices or using SPDX identifiers. And then at the very bottom, I included as well some copy and paste website footers, which can be used on GitHub repos for READMEs, or they could be used on websites. The idea being that if we have a project, which is a reference implementation of GraphQL or a sub-specification, we really should be saying, here's where the parent specification is, here's a link back to the project, here's a link to the code of conduct, here's a link off to the various assets that we have, and so forth. And this just helps make sure that if something is happening under the banner of GraphQL, that it's consistent, that somebody who's participating is able to find these things. Really, the two kind of key ones that we do need to make sure really are there would be code of conduct and the link back to the actual GraphQL organization itself. And that brings us down to the very bottom of this, and realize that's a lot of information. Does anybody have any questions about this?
Yeah, I have one minor question, which was the voting information and term limits and everything makes sense. I note there's like already a slate of voting members. I was just curious, was there a vote already somewhere, or did those just get picked by the Linux Foundation?
They got picked by me. So I wanted to avoid a drama of like coming right out of the gates and immediately having to do a big voting process. So instead, I got to pick the original members, and then after that, it'll go into a voting process when each term comes up. And they chose those mostly from a couple different angles. One is a handful of people who have been involved with GraphQL for a long time. Another set of people who are tertiarily involved with GraphQL, but have a different perspective than the typical folks that show up here. And so you see kind of like an assortment of folks with various levels of existing involvement and involvement in other projects outside GraphQL as well. And then everybody on this list has a track record of, whether on GraphQL or on some other project, exhibiting good technical leadership. But ultimately, the set of members is my judgment. Good question.
I just added in there too that one of the things that came up in conversations as we were putting this together was that we'll start the election process next year. So that gives us basically 1 year of stability to figure out whether this process works. Do we need to make some tweaks to it? It would be probably a little jarring to announce that this is the case and then announce that nominations had opened up yesterday or 3 days ago or whatever it would be. So.
Right. Faster bootstrap.
Yeah. The main thing here that I think if you take nothing else from this, the goal is to create something that's lightweight but also adaptable. Rigid structures can be very difficult, particularly in a project like this, which everybody is very focused on the technology. We're all scattered all over the world, and so effectively, the lighter weight we can make this, the better. And if something needs to be adapted, it's the process to adapt policies and procedures is written in here, and it's thoroughly baked into the concept that the TSC itself should be self-governing. Now, there are some things which are written in stone, which we can't change, and these are the things which are defined in the specification membership agreement. But aside from that, I mean, the goal is to work this around the project versus wrap the project around this.
I'll also mention, this is just the details of what it is and how it works. What's left a little bit between the lines is the motivation to have this. So Brian mentioned that every Linux Foundation project has something like this. But my personal motivation in setting this up is mostly to scale myself, because I know my own amount of time to invest in things is somewhat limited. And so when a decision does come up, almost always we were able to kind of self-govern as a working group. And that's my expectation, is we'll keep doing that. But in scenarios where we do need to make a call, I'd like for that not to always have to land on me as an individual and be able to sort of lean on a group of folks. I expect that I'll continue to lean on people outside this immediate set for help. Everyone in this group has helped lift, especially spec projects, and then also leaning back on organizations and other implementations of GraphQL. I expect we'll keep doing that. For other things that are a bit more about just kind of the operations of keeping things moving, then this is the set of people I'll probably lean on first. Hopefully buy myself some time. Any other open questions?
I have technical question. I noticed a couple of spelling mistakes. So I will open PR to fix them. For example, like GraphQL Schafer written correctly. And based on that, there is a question. So it's safe to merge spelling fixes to this document, but everything which is not spelling fixes should be like voided, right? So we cannot just add like a project to a list of projects or change something like inside. Only like small correction and like obvious things, right?
Yeah, anything that's clearly a mistake, spelling mistake or otherwise, absolutely feel free to just go fix it. Anything that's a meaningful change, that's when you'd want to rely on the guidance that's outlined here. Make sure there's no objections, get approval from 2 other folks, and leave it open for a couple of days so that people have an opportunity to see it and object. Usually if there's something that's big enough that we would expect any of these would actually be an issue, we'd almost always want to like put it on the agenda and discuss it in this meeting anyway. I expect the times that we'll want to just like put a PR up and merge it are going to be for the things that are going to be pretty obvious. The rest we can talk about in person.
Yeah, and you know, to be honest, one of the easiest ways to handle this, if there is something like that where you find a spelling error or whatever, is just, you know, open up the PR, tag a few people to review it, and then it can get merged in. Same thing for the approvals. This is a good place to use the requested approvers feature in GitHub to be able to flag other folks on the TSC who could provide those 2 approvals. The last thing though, you know, again, in keeping with the idea of having minimal structure here, is that there is also a provision in there that if there's a TSC meeting and you've got quorum and there are enough people who are willing to put something through and approve it, then we don't need to keep it open. You know, effectively, everybody's been there, they've had a chance to weigh in, so just go ahead and go with it.
Cool. If any other questions pop up, feel free to shoot me a message on Slack. But otherwise, happy to have an additional set of folks sort of rotate in. I expect most of the discussion points we'll have that are TSC related, we'll do in the first 30 minutes to an hour of these meetings, and most meetings won't have that much stuff related that's like TSC specific. But just making sure that the 2 meetings are one and the same will be good. It'll just provide a little bit of additional diversity of folks who show up here, which is always a good thing. Okay, let's move on to our next agenda item. Thanks, Brian, for helping walk through all of that with us. Absolutely. Next up is schema coordinates. Mark, I'll hand it to you.
Sweet, thanks. Yeah, just before I start, is there someone else that can take over the note typing? I shared the Google link.
Yeah, I'm here now. Thanks.
Oh, hey, Benjie. Also, okay. Also, let me know if there's issues with audio because new headphones. Okay, so yeah, this is the 3rd time I think I've been here. Schema coordinates RFC is chugging along. Quick, brief reminder for people who maybe aren't familiar. The elevator pitch here is in various GraphQL projects, we need to refer to a component of the schema. So a common example is just a field name on a type. So if you have a user type and a name attribute on that type, that might commonly be written down as user.name. And that's great, we all understand that, but there's nothing formal that defines that convention. And increasingly tooling is using this convention for various things. So this RFC tries to standardize that syntax and extends it to be able to select things like arguments on those queries. So yeah, I've been through a few rounds of reviews, and I had a pretty intense review from Ivan Maximov, so thank you for that. I responded to, yeah, I think all the feedback that I've seen so far, and now I'm here to be like, anyone have any training thoughts? And yeah, what are the next steps here? I put the actual, I made an actual spec edit in a new file because I wasn't sure where it was supposed to go. So I expect there's some bike shedding that we could do on kind of how and where exactly that stuff lives. But yeah, I'm keen to hear everyone's thoughts. I can't hear anything. I hope people aren't speaking.
Just taking a read.
Oh, sorry. I just plugged my headphones in. So.
I'll just take a first pass and a feedback for you. I'm sure probably what will be most useful is going through a detailed feedback of your actual appendix suggested addition. But and a lot of that can probably happen offline after the call. So maybe that's like an action here, is to just ask people to take a look at that and roll through with detailed feedback. It might be helpful just to split this pull request into two parts. Like the RFC that's just documenting your process, and I think we've already had some precedent for merging those RFCs in pretty even when they're in an intermediate state, and that's totally fine. Of course, stuff that goes into the spec that we only want to merge in once things are sort of approved and finalized. So kind of cutting the two files apart will let you put one in and iterate on top of it, and keep the other one as like crisp, the only changes to the spec. That's just kind of a minutia thing. And then just like my high level thoughts, I'll give you detailed feedback on this. I think it's coming in, the shape of this is much, much nicer than it was last time you presented it, and it covers a lot more scope. So it looks like you've really done good research on thinking through all of the various cases. Two high level pieces of feedback. One is in defining the grammar. I think the grammar is probably a little bit more complicated than it needs to be. Like type name field specifier and interface name field specifier are probably the same thing. It may be the same with union name versus a type. Like how do you refer to a type separate from a union? So I think that can probably just be simplified a bit. And the examples section around selecting a type there's a lot of sort of copy pasta happening there. Maybe it's just a matter of formatting. I'd suggest maybe a table where you could have one column that's the kind of thing that you want to select, and then another column that's an example of selecting that kind of thing. Just that might make it a little bit easier to read. But I'm really happy to see that like any possible thing that's in there, you have an example that selects it. That's pretty nice. Yeah. My other thing that's sort of like actually consequential about the design is in selecting an argument, either a directive argument or a type field argument, how do you feel about trailing a colon after the argument name? Or how does anybody else feel about that? I don't know if this came up in the past when you were looking through this, but I know I've seen, I think Swift in doing their documentation when like referring to a function parameter, named function parameter will often trail with a colon. And it's kind of an interesting, it's like it's clear, it's like, oh, there's a colon, probably something comes after that colon. So I'm just curious to hear if people think that's just noise or if that would be helpful.
I like that. It's from Objective-C, I think, originally. And yeah, it's always seemed quite neat to me.
It also matches, it makes the like argument itself matching closer to the like what you would write in an actual document.
It helps, I think, to prevent confusion that it doesn't look like you're trying to call something. Like it's very clearly that this is the argument, not the actual input.
Yeah, and I think if at some point, like in future, or as vendor extension, we decide to add asterisk, it will like make sense, like filtering for combination of argument name and a value. So, for example, find all fields that specify first 10 items or something. So, yeah, have a colon is.
It also potentially lets us specify a field that requires multiple arguments. Like we could fairly reasonably update the spec to allow pointing to a field and be referring to a field when that field has both a width and a height argument.
Oh, that's an interesting direction. Yeah, probably not something you want to do here, but it's nice that that would carve a path for it.
Could you expand on that point slightly? I'm slightly missing.
Yeah,
the
so
intent.
when I respond to support requests from people, I quite often just oh, we have this field and what you need to do is have this field and provide both the width and the argument and the height argument for a profile picture, right? And while right now the argument is the argument specifier is an end state. So you're saying, okay, we coordinate down, we hit a specific field, we're talking about a specific argument. It may be the case that we want a unified way of talking about a field in the situation where it has these three arguments.
Maybe I'm sort of missing some sort of polymorphic behavioral or sort of overloading of functions here, but in a schema, you only get to use field name once, even if it's not like you can have user. It's not like you can have user.photo with just a width parameter and a separate user.photo field that demands a width and height parameter. Is that correct?
Sort of. Well,
yes.
Yeah. So I think that this is true for how this proposal uses schema coordinates to refer to specific elements within the schema, but basically anything that we put into the spec, people will start, any grammar that we put into the spec, people are going to start using in unexpected ways, and providing a path for, okay, now we need to provide a list of, we need multiple arguments because we want to be describing a field. Oh, that's the same thing as what we're doing in the coordinates.
I think. Sorry, go ahead, Mark.
Oh yeah, just to kind of super clarify the intent of this proposal. So one of the things that we said we would not do is this there's no star selector syntax. It's very specifically, you can only select a field or an argument. It's one specific thing rather than a set of things. But I guess what you're saying is this is just a way to kind of more specifically specify a field. But I think the point is when you do start adding arguments into your selector, you're then selecting that argument for that field rather than that field, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I think the confusion, and this is something that confused me the first time I read through the RFC as well, is the use of parentheses for that. So internally at Shopify, we do the dot notation like everybody else, but we just do more dots. So if we want an argument, it's like type dot field dot argument. And it's just the fact that there are two layers, and that makes it clearer that like this is not query syntax or SDL syntax. This is just like referencing the specific argument.
Yeah, I guess so I think for the context of this is only for referencing the schema, this makes sense. I've seen lots of dot syntax for also like going through the elements of a query and just making it possible to merge those eventually is probably desirable, even if that's outside the scope of this pull request.
Yeah, to be clear, Mark, what you said about limiting the intent and scope of this particular thing is definitely the right thing to do. I think what Matt is getting at is in the future, when people try to do new things, they will look back at precedent of syntax and then try to extend it in the narrowest way possible, which is good. And in doing so, we should just sort of think like, what are the ways that people might want to extend this in the future? And will this break in kind of gross ways, or are there kind of a little bit more clear paths into those things that we would be comfortable with? So even though we don't want to address them now, we think that there's room for decent design in that space. So thinking like, what would a delimiter be if you wanted to point to two arguments in a single coordinate? That's not something we want to do now, but it's something someone might want to do in the future. Or if you want to replace any element here with an asterisk, like, does that break? Do you need additional syntax beyond just the asterisks? My sense is that you have that here. Like you have a structure that will support a lot of those things.
Yeah,
So
I kind of like, I put like a red line at the top of the thing being like, but this is not like an arbitrary selector syntax thing. That's another PR can deal with that. But definitely kept that use case in mind, that this should be extensible enough that someone can come along and extend upon this syntax and do that. It sounds like we're roughly on the same page there. I do like the idea of the colon thing. I guess I'm still missing, and maybe this is just kind of something that Matt, you could raise in like a comment or an issue or something, and we could sort of get into the nitty gritty there. Yeah, it sounds like the intent of putting that in this RFC would be in support of like future use cases like the star selecting like we're talking about. But
so
maybe I'm sort of misunderstanding.
I would actually say it was more, I was excited when Lee proposed the colon because immediately my mind jumped to, oh, this allows this future use case, not that that's actually important to this specific proposal.
I understand. Okay, yeah, maybe this is just kind of something we talk about in a comment, if that's okay.
I have one other.
Definitely.
Yeah, agreed. Thank you. I have one other thing that I wanted to ask about on this, which is for fields on an input object. Obviously, like you can use the like input object name dot field syntax pretty straightforwardly. But if you have a field on a regular object which has an argument of the type of the input object, do we want to be able to drill down into like the subfields of the input argument input object in the argument of the output field? Does that make sense? Maybe I should write an example.
Yeah, my brain did not take that in. I'm sorry.
It was actually one of the questions I was wondering as well. So for example, if you've got like one of the old traditional relay style input object mutations, you might want to refer to a subfield within. So for example, the create user mutation, then the input argument of that, and then the like user field of that, and then the first name field of that, because it's nested input objects, for example. Is there a way to define that path? Because at the moment, the specification relates specifically to a component within the schema, whereas this might be, for example, a component within a query, like the path through the JSON object tree that you are feeding into an argument, for example.
Yeah, so I put a trivial example into the chat here, because this is exactly the syntax that Shopify's internal logging uses. Actually, I mean, you use dots for everything instead of the parentheses for the argument, but we do allow you to just nest all the way down.
Yeah, I guess I was imagining that maybe we just need an example for this, but would bar.baz, if you wanted to select the baz string.
Yeah, you could definitely do just a regular bar.baz.
Right. Yeah, that's what I was imagining.
That's definitely still valid, but like that's not sufficiently specific to select the baz input inside the bar for that specific field, rather than just like in general.
I mean, I guess this issue crops up because you could arbitrarily nest like any type in this schema. So if you have like a user type, you know, a review is written by a user. So you might have review.author, which returns a user type. You might have, you know, logged in thing, which returns a user type. And then there's like specificity issues there, like which kind of user type do you want? So I'm wondering if this is like a more general problem, and like, do we care like, yeah, like what are the situations or use cases where that distinction is meaningful?
Yeah, it's like I guess it's just like arbitrary pathing through requests and inputs, which I think your the RFC already has like the array syntax, or oh, hold on, where did I see that? Yeah, the field path, right? The field path is already a thing in the GraphQL spec that accomplishes this for inputs, but we don't really have a field path equivalent for inputs.
Right. It makes sense to some things, like, because yeah, this is just something that we've like concluded here that is not kind of like explicitly stated in the RFC, and maybe that can be an opportunity for someone to be like, actually, this distinction is meaningful. Here's like a use case where we care about it, and maybe we need to go back to the drawing board there. So at the very least, kind of, I will make an amendment to the RFC to include that site.
It's unclear to me that we would, like, the foo.field.bar.baz feels very much like what you would describe the like executable document, what you would describe as happening in the executable document, which, as you said, maps very closely to field paths. And this RFC explicitly only allows one level of nesting. So it's type to field to argument. And that argument has a type, but then, as I think Mark brought up, you can then refer to that type's field explicitly. I think there is something about linking all of that, being able to link all of that together and create like person.friend.name, but that maps more closely to the concept of field path and is, it feels like,
I think that's fair.
Yes, that's valuable, but probably not if we want to keep everything one level deep.
Yeah, I think what I'm actually, the problem I was trying to solve there is like field paths do not let you dive into arguments right now.
And I think they should. That's probably like
a separate problem.
A separate, yeah. It's related, it's similar, it feels very similar, but it's like, it's not identical. And it may be the case that we actually want to end up merging the field paths and schema coordinates into like one unified concept that you can use anywhere. But it's, yeah, that seems like a larger iterative process to get there.
It does seem worthwhile to limit the grammar such that if you say I have a schema coordinate, then you know for sure that you have like the canonical version of that and not one that you then would have to canonicalize, right? Like this particular example, Evan, that you put out as like a path into a particular thing, like you eventually arrive at a point in that schema, but there's the shorter path is just saying bar.baz, right? That's the shortest path to that exact same spot. That loses information, which is how did you reach that point? And if that, like, how did you reach that is also important information to convey, that's not provided in the coordinate. But if we think those are actually two pieces of information, the good news is that at least with the bare pieces that Mark is proposing, we can still provide that. We can say, we can give you like many schema coordinates, like if 2 in the example that you propose, but if the path goes deeper, more than that, to at least describe that. And while that is clunky, it's at least a way in. But I think this fits really well into what Matt was suggesting, which is there are a set of things that people will want to do beyond just point to a particular place in the schema. So one example was query against that schema, so asterisk syntax or whatever. This piece that you're proposing is path into schema, so not just point, but also path to point. These are all great, and this is why I think this proposal deserves a lot of really good feedback, because just going through this thought exercise is worthwhile. It's the right decision to keep schema coordinates limited to the particular use case, but knowing what an extension of it into these other use cases might look like is a very worthwhile thing to do, to make sure that the grammar that we end up with doesn't just feel reasonable for the schema coordinates case, but feels like with a little bit of additional thought gives us good design space to handle these other problems.
Yeah, that all makes sense. I think just kind of like one other bit of context here, which is relevant, is that one of the goals of this spec is to have a sort of bidirectional, one way in each direction of going from a schema coordinate to a thing in the schema and vice versa. Or maybe just kind of some way of like specifying the most normalized form of that schema coordinate path. Because the use cases do predicate that, like if you're hovering over, GraphQL and you see the hyperlink to something, when you like, what's what I'm looking for here? When you crunch a user document with a query in, and you want to be able to like map back to the things in the schema, if you had like multiple ways, if the algorithm meant that you could have like multiple paths, how would you like match that up with those like most normalized schema coordinates, so that you get into some sort of like edge casey type behavior here, which I was keen to avoid. But yeah, if people feel like we need to kind of like add some sort of amendment to this for multiple parameters here, then yeah, I mean, we'll do what kind of makes the most sense, and maybe we can sort of start that with comments on the RFC, just because I'm like had trouble sort of specifically imagining what that looks like as an extension to the current thing without violating that property.
That sounds good. Okay, so the next action is to let's make sure we go into this actual PR and start to flesh out these details. And Mark, it'd be helpful if you pull the RFC text specifically out into a separate PR, so we can land that, and then we can iterate on top of that. You can get collaborators, whereas the spec text can be separate.
Okay, and one question I wanted to ask, like, do you envision assigning like a set of reviewers for this, or should we just do it and then people can volunteer to review it and we'll meet again next month? Or just curious like what that process looks like now.
I think the folks who've been most vocal are probably your most reasonable reviewers, but I think it's reasonable to say kind of whoever shows up. So Evan, Matt, you guys should both chime in with thoughts. I will also do the same, but anybody else is welcome.
Thanks. Yeah, and thanks again to everyone so far who's chimed in and given thoughts. I appreciate everyone.
Yeah, thanks for the progress on this. Okay, let's move on to the next topic, defer and stream. Rob, I'll hand it to you.
Yeah, so have some progress from the last meeting. Been working with Ivan, and he has published an official experimental release of GraphQL JS. And I think one of Express GraphQL will be coming soon. So hoping that we get people to try it out and give us some feedback. I got some feedback already that I'm working on addressing. Nothing major, but just some implementation details. Yeah, so I hope that while we're blocked on the TypeScript migration in GraphQL JS, we could get the feedback that we need.
Yeah,
Also,
we also have it now implemented with hot chocolate. And we also have it, we are shipping it, I think, next week in a build. So we have it already in preview builds, and it works out quite nicely. So
yeah, great. Is that both defer and stream?
we are still working on stream. Defer is fine. I mean, I reported back the thing with the mutation to you.
Mm.
And but defer is really working out quite nicely. So
Yeah, and I've heard from someone I know that uses your implementation that they're experimenting with it with their code too. So
yeah, from the relay side, you mean Marias? Or
yeah.
We are working with Autoguru. They are using relay and doing the other side and connecting it to it. So it works really nice. The implementation was good. I think there are a couple of rough edges I noted down. I just hadn't had the time to give you some more feedback, but I will do it the next few days.
Yeah, great. And Yvonne also suggested that I write a blog post to get some more attention to the fact that we have these branches. So I drafted that. I'll share it with what I have with you guys. Just kind of like a paragraph to say that these features are here, and a quick explanation, and then some pointers to where to read more about it. I don't know if that's something that you guys would want to publish on the GraphQL Foundation website, or yeah, and I'm also going to present about it at a couple of meetups. So
yeah, we also have
That's
integrated it already in our GraphQL IDE, which is based on VS Code. It really is cool now to use end-to-end. You can basically try it out and you see how your JSON graph is being patched up, and you can time travel in there. So we have a lot of tooling already around it.
yeah, that's awesome. And I also got some spec feedback from Benjie that I'm working on.
Nice. You should mention this to Yuri. Yuri is working on putting together a new version of our newsletter, and is starting to do some work on the GraphQL Twitter account. So that's a good channel for, like, if you're going to publish a blog post on Medium or wherever you want to do that, talking about what's going on here, or if you end up recording a meetup talk or something like that, Yuri can help you spread that.
Yeah, I'll reach out to him. Otherwise, I think that's pretty much it. I think blocked by TypeScript migration before we move forward anymore. But hopefully we get people to try everything out while we're waiting.
Yeah, and it's one of the things, at least with our implementation, the users are very psyched about. So a lot of people want to use it because it's so much more convenient than using batching, for instance, with those export directives, because it's just more natural to just put a defer directive there.
That's good to hear. There's positive feedback. I see you also have you linked in the agenda the Express GraphQL PR. I know you were waiting on the GraphQL JS changes for that, but anything you need for that piece?
I spoke with Yvonne, and I think he's going to publish an experimental package off of that branch, same way that we already have for GraphQL JS.
Okay.
Yes, so clarification about that. So we discussed it with Rob, and I suggested that we have, like, every official release will have experimental release attached to it. So that way person can, like, knows that everything is stable, every other library is working. And one thing you need to change is in your package JSON, you just, to a version, you just add dash experimental, dot experimental, stream differ, and that's all. You need to do only one change. That's why, in a sense, publishing of first release is blocked by publishing of new revision of Express GraphQL. So idea is to have like matching release. But way it's like you're not demanding every library to be tested. Like if library is not related, for example, GraphQL tag, if GraphQL tag is not related to stream differ, and it's working on 15.4.0, it's mean like you safe to just add experimental stream differ and everything will work as is. That's why Express GraphQL, I need to, in next couple days, probably tomorrow, I will release a new version, and after that we'll release accompanying experimental release. So it's purely technical. There is no like, yeah, nothing is broken. It's just based on release schemas that we agreed with Rob.
Sounds good. Thanks for, I know this is like one of the most sophisticated changes we've made in a long time. I really appreciate that every month there's like continuous iterative progress on this. I feel like that's also kind of rare. Like usually these things happen and it's like it sits still for months and then it leaps ahead. But I feel like you've been doing a really awesome job sort of keeping a drumbeat on this and moving it ahead. So thank you for that.
Yeah, just trying to keep the ball rolling. I guess final question. Is this considered a stage 2 proposal at this point? I was going to mention that in the blog post.
That is a good question. I think probably yes, especially since we have the reference implementation experimental branch out. I think that is probably the qualifier for stage 2. I think it's probably safe to say that in the blog post, but maybe let's follow up on the actual spec RFC change itself to make sure that's tagged correctly. But I think that makes sense.
On the issue of,
yep,
so
go ahead.
No, please, you go.
Yeah, just have a question also. So with defer and stream going into the spec, is there some progress on live or is it dropped? Did Facebook ever get it properly working?
I personally have not worked on live at all.
I just remember that
Facebook is still here.
Ah, okay. I just remember, I mean, was it this talk from Yuli where you presented all those experimental features at React? Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's just, but you don't have any knowledge.
My understanding, I wish Matt or Jafar was still here because I know that they had been pretty close to that over the last couple of years. That experiments were happening on all of those directives. Oh, Matt, you are still here. Do you have any, and Jafar, you're here too. Just general updates on like what happened long term with the experiments around both the first stream and also live?
So defer and stream are very actively used. We like, it is, defer and stream are both very common tools for people at Facebook.
Nice. What about live?
Live is also a fairly actively used tool, but it like the server side complications and implications of live versus like stream and defer, you can basically just add to, you don't necessarily need to, yeah, there's like server side things that happen with live that don't work on all kinds of servers that stream and defer basically don't have to deal with at the same level.
Yeah, you basically need a reactive data store and stuff like that.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
Would it be worse also to start working on an RFC there, or if you guys had some input on that? Because I just get often questions about live specifically.
Yeah.
Do you mind if I just add a little sort of context there? Because you raise a good point about the reactive data store. There has been some evolution here. I would say that at the moment, one of the big changes for us is that on the server side, we were taking a reactive approach. And I think it's fair to say at this point, we've decidedly moved against that. So we're no longer, you can think of live queries as on the server side, having a stack, or at least we're iterating towards having a stack very similar to subscriptions. So in other words, moving from a reactive data model to an explicitly triggered event. And I think there's some learnings there. Certainly may not apply to everyone, but at our scale, that was very difficult to achieve the efficiency we needed. And so I think there's two value propositions for live queries. One is developer experience, of course, right? Ease of use for opting into real-time systems. And then on the client, developer experience on the client. And the second is developer experience on the server. Of course, you're always trying to, and developer experience on the server, meaning not having to explicitly trigger things, having a reactive data store. At least I think it's fair to say at Facebook, the latter has failed and that the former is still very much an open question. That's an area where, for a variety of reasons, we haven't invested as much. Like we have some moderate support for live queries, but by live, it's quite coarse-grained, like meaning like, oh, something in the collection changed. Let's go get the whole collection again. I think our aspirations for liveness are quite a bit more advanced, but I wouldn't say we've tried several times to get more fine-grained and more sophisticated about the API. I would still say we're very, very much in the iteration space there, and it's too early for an RFC. Does that sound right to you, Matt?
Yeah, that sounds correct to me. It's also the case that like, because Facebook has so many more years of basically tech debt in GraphQL and in the GraphQL space, and like we still have situations that the open source community would never encounter because of the legacy syntax that GraphQL used to have. So just because we are iterating and our iteration is slower than you would anticipate from the outside, doesn't mean that like there will not be progress. And it also doesn't mean necessarily that the like broader community shouldn't also be iterating on something in this space. But yeah, basically an RFC would be complex at this point.
Okay. Yeah, but good to hear it's not that.
Not yet. I think it's interesting. There are some constructs in GraphQL which are just, it's worth calling out, are just difficult to make live. Connections are really an interesting point where it's really sort of this thought of control flow coming from the client. And so that's one that we've struggled with. Yeah, inconclusive, I would say at this point.
Okay.
I remember the last time that I was involved with that, which was quite a while ago, there was even a discussion about whether live was a property of an entire query versus a property of something within the query. Whereas defer and stream, we resolved that. Defer and stream happened within the query. But live is like, do you just kind of tag the entire thing as live, or can a subset be live? I don't know if you guys have made any progress on even that question.
I think it's fair to say we have. I mean, that still is our aspiration. And then at this point, we do have fully live queries. And so what we find is, in general, we want to adjust. Essentially, what we're always trying to figure out a way to do is decouple the what and the how, right? And GraphQL query is a fantastic way of describing the what. And increasingly, we've moved to how, configuring the how with configuration, and often we end up with sub-configuration at a fragment level. So similar to defer, it's quite possible, for example, I would want a different cadence of, I would want different freshness guarantees for one fragment and a different freshness guarantees for another. And so that's been, I would say, the area where we just haven't made the progress that we would like to. And I don't think it's necessarily because, well, actually it is hard. We've made several attempts, like live connections and what we call live sets. And so I think we can, the only thing we can say at this point is it is a hard problem, and our aspirations are to continue pushing on that, but it's slow going.
Right.
Any other open questions here?
Yeah, this is just a like process question. Came earlier in the conversation about how do we teach this? Is it going to be a blog post? And I know that there is graphql.org/blog, and you can kind of get to it through the Learn tab, but it's not super discoverable in any other ways. I'm wondering if that's like something worth investing in a bit more.
That's a great question. That's actually one of the things that Yuri is looking at right now. He's in the process of migrating the GraphQL website to use Gatsby, and actually missed the blog in the first cut at doing that, and someone had to point out to him that got missed. The blog, our understanding right now is the blog is basically deprecated, but we don't want to remove the content that's already there to the degree that people have links to it, just because we don't really have a good commitment at updating that as a source of truth for things. And Yuri is looking into other things that we might want to do to spread information, whether that's like have an official Medium page or just have an aggregation that we use, and you could use the website or the Twitter account or mailing list to send out those aggregations. But yeah, I think part of that is we never got particularly very sophisticated about how we treated that blog in the first place, and so there are better tools for it. That's the current thinking. But if anyone wants to resurrect that, then they're welcome to join Yuri in helping figure that out.
Yeah, we kind of have second blog on foundation.graphql.org. We have a second blog, and actually we use it for Summer of Code and Season of Dogs announcements. And I actually want to suggest to give it more visibility on graphql.org, because we actually have a content. We just publish it under Foundation blog because it's discoverable, at least somehow. Like not a lot of people discover Foundation page in first place, but it's like still there is a path to link instead of just guessing URL. So I would say we have content for a blog, even if it's like simple stuff like seasonal Summer of Code. You see shows that project is active and like students are working on something, and this something is getting merged. Same as frequently Caroline working on frequently asked questions, and we will have feedback and additional questions. So I actually think work would be useful. Plus experiment, not as opinion piece, not as somebody opinion on what to do, how to do something, but as announcement thing. We can reference to something, but I think Rob article, you cannot fit it into Twitter post. It needs to be published somewhere.
Yeah, there needs to be a source of truth for it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You should channel this feedback to Yuri. He's really owning this problem, and both not just the website, but kind of how information gets out there in general, marketing problem. And he's been pretty smart about it, and Orta is helping him out on it a lot already. So I know he's kind of looking for additional help and support in doing that. So feel free to just let Yuri know that you're interested in helping.
Yeah, I might reach out to Uri about that. It feels like a force for good. See
Absolutely. All right, that was our last agenda item. Anything else you want to cover before we call the meeting?
Just because I haven't done the Google Doc thing before. Well, I'll speak to Benjie about it after this. So.
Okay.
I had just one thing. It would be helpful if in the application, in the agenda, we added not just our names, but our GitHub usernames at that point, because it will make it a lot easier when then referencing people in action items, if we can cross-reference that very easily.
That's a great suggestion. Love that. I will, I just added blank agendas for the first 3 months of next year. I will add that to the recommendations in the attendees list, and I'll do that to my own name so that when people copy pasta, they spot that. Love that idea. Let's make it happen. All right. Well, this one was short and sweet, but action-packed with lots of stuff. So thanks for the healthy discussion, everyone. Stay sane out there. Enjoy the rest of your day. And we'll see you all again next month.
Hey.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.